Your doctor checks your blood pressure, says 148/78, and you think, well, the bottom number looks okay. DOC, the bottom one's fine, right? I hear this every single week. Patients point at that second number like it's a safety certificate. After 20 years as a cardiac surgeon, I'm telling you straight that thinking has put people on my operating table. The number that matters most after 60 is not the one you've been watching. And today, I'm going to change that. In the next 20 minutes, I'll show you exactly which number to watch and why your arteries after 60 play by completely different rules, and what you can do starting this week to protect yourself without waiting for a crisis. Stay with me. This one is genuinely important. Blood pressure after 60 is a different conversation entirely. Most people learn about it in their 40s, cut back on salt, life moves on. But the way your cardiovascular system handles pressure changes dramatically as you age. What was manageable at 45 can be genuinely dangerous at 65. Same numbers, different body, different risk. What was harmless at 45 can be quietly dangerous at 65. So, let's get the language right. When your doctor reads your blood pressure, you get to numbers. 148/78, for example. Let's break that down. That first number, 148, is your systolic pressure, the force your heart creates when it squeezes and pushes blood out into your arteries. Think of it as the peak pressure, the moment of maximum effort. The second number, 78, is your diastolic, the pressure when your heart is resting between beats. For decades, medicine focused heavily on that bottom number. Diastolic hypertension was considered the main threat. For younger adults, that's still a valid concern. But something shifts after 60. The relationship between those two numbers changes fundamentally. And the risks, the ones that can actually kill you, change with it. Here's the core of what I want you to understand. After 60, your arteries are not the same flexible tubes they were at 30. They've stiffened. And that single biological fact changes everything about which number deserves your attention. And frankly, your doctor's focus concern, the stiff pipe problem. Imagine your garden hose in spring. Flexible, soft, bounces back when you squeeze it. No resistance at all. Now picture that same hose left outside through 10 winters. Rigid, brittle. You bend it and it cracks. That's what happens to your arteries over time. Not because something went wrong, because that's biology. Collagen fibers gradually replace the elastic tissue. The walls thicken. The vessels lose their ability to expand. When your heart contracts and pushes blood out, healthy young arteries act like shock absorbers. They expand slightly, then spring back. The peak force stays controlled, but stiff arteries can't do that. When your heart pushes, there's nowhere for that pressure to go. The wave hits a rigid wall and bounces back hard. Your systolic number spikes. Meanwhile, diastolic pressure can actually drop or stay flat. And this is where people get dangerously confused. This is why so many people over 60 end up with a high top number and a perfectly normal bottom number. It's not reassuring. It's a warning sign, and it has a name. Isolated systolic hypertension. Your TOB number consistently at or above 140. Your bottom below 90. Normal bottom high top. Patients with this pattern often feel completely fine. No headaches, no dizziness, no dramatic warning symptoms. So, they dismiss it, and that's exactly the danger. My bottom number is normal. I must be doing okay. I've had this conversation more times than I can count, and every time it troubles me deeply. The research is unambiguous, and I want to say that clearly. Isolated systolic hypertension is not a quirk of aging. It is not something to simply accept and ignore. It is one of the strongest predictors of heart attack, stroke, and heart failure in adults over 60. Stronger than elevated diastolic pressure alone in this age group. A landmark study found that every 10-point increase in systolic above 140 raised cardiovascular risk by roughly 20%. 20% for 10 points. Think about someone sitting at 160 systolic, pointing at their 75 diastolic and feeling relieved. That gap is carrying real life-shortening risk. Here's a question worth sitting with. When did you last check your top number at home, not just in the doctor's office? Write that in the comments. I've spent 20 years in operating rooms dealing with the consequences of unmanaged pressure. I'd rather talk with you now than meet you under very different circumstances later. Let me tell you something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in routine checkups. Your brain is the most pressure-sensitive organ in your body. It runs on a constant, carefully regulated blood supply. Tiny vessels, some thinner than a human hair, feed billions of neurons around the clock. And those tiny vessels are the first casualties of chronic high systolic pressure.
I've performed over 2,000 open heart surgeries. 2,000? And I can tell you exactly what kills people after 60. It's not what they ate at McDonald's. It's what they ate thinking it was healthy. The low-fat yogurt, the whole grain crackers, the glass of orange juice every single morning, the diet soda instead of the bad regular one. These are the choices people feel good about. And these are the exact things I see clogging arteries on my operating table. Not burger grease, not bacon, the foods with heart-healthy labels on the front. Today, I'm going to name them all, 10 categories. And by the end of this video, you will never look at your grocery cart the same way again. Let me take you back to the 1970s for a moment. That's when everything changed, and not in a good way. A researcher published a study claiming dietary fat was the main driver of heart disease. It spread through medicine like wildfire. Governments rewrote nutrition guidelines overnight. The food industry pivoted overnight. Suddenly, fat was the villain, and low-fat everything was presented as the answer to heart disease. So Americans cut the butter, switched to margarine, replaced eggs with cereal, bought products stamped low-fat, heart-healthy, doctor-approved, and heart disease kept killing people, kept being the #1 cause of death decade after decade. Something was wrong with the theory. Here's what the science actually shows. Now, the real damage to your heart doesn't start with fat. It starts with inflammation. Specifically inside your arteries, chronic low-grade inflammation inside the walls of your arteries. That's the real enemy. And it builds silently for years before anyone notices. Think of your arteries like a garden hose. When they're healthy, they're smooth, flexible, elastic. Blood flows through easily with no resistance. But when inflammation sets in, and it does this quietly for years, the inner lining starts to crack. The body tries to patch those cracks with plaque. That plaque builds up, hardens, narrows the channel, restricts blood flow. And one day on my table, that hose finally gives out completely. So what triggers that inflammation? Not saturated fat from a grass-fed steak, not the cholesterol in your morning eggs. The research is increasingly clear on this. The main drivers are ultra-processed foods, refined carbohydrates, and hidden sugar. They spike insulin. They flood your bloodstream with inflammatory markers. They damage the endothelium. That's the delicate inner lining of your arteries, faster than almost anything else you can eat. After 60, your arteries have already been through a lot. They're less forgiving than they were at 40. The margin for error gets smaller every single year. That's why what you eat now matters more than it ever did before. So let's talk about what's actually on your plate, starting with the biggest surprises. Let's start with something sitting in almost every refrigerator in America right now. Flavored yogurt. It's marketed as a health food. Probiotics, calcium, light, low fat. The packaging shows fresh berries and a smiling woman in athletic wear. You've probably been eating it for years, feeling genuinely good about that choice. Here's the problem. When manufacturers remove fat from yogurt, it tastes terrible. So they compensate by adding sugar, a significant amount of it. A single container of flavored low-fat yogurt can contain up to 25, sometimes 30 grams of added sugar. That's roughly the same as a candy bar. And here's why that matters specifically after 60. Your insulin sensitivity drops with age. Your pancreas doesn't respond as quickly as it used to when you were younger. So when you eat that yogurt for breakfast, your blood sugar spikes fast and stays elevated far longer than it would in a 40-year-old eating the same thing. That repeated daily spike is one of the most consistent predictors of arterial damage that I know of. It's not dramatic, it's just relentless. The same logic applies to instant oatmeal with flavoring. Plain oats, excellent food. I recommend them, but the apple cinnamon packet from the supermarket shelf is a different story. Check the label. Many brands contain 12 to 15 grams of sugar per serving. Plus, the oats are so heavily processed, they digest almost as fast as white bread. Your body barely notices the difference between that healthy breakfast and a bowl of sugar. Does that mean you can never eat yogurt or oatmeal? Absolutely not. Just choose plain Greek yogurt and add your own fresh berries. Cook still cut oats instead of the instant flavored version. Two simple swaps, completely different impact on your arteries. Now, this one genuinely surprises people because whole grain bread and crackers sound like exactly what a doctor would recommend. And in theory, whole grains are beneficial. Fiber, minerals, slower digestion, those are all real benefits. The problem is what happens to those grains by the time they reach the supermarket shelf in a packaged form. Pick up almost any whole grain bread or cracker and flip it over. Look past the word whole wheat in the ingredients. Look for what comes right after it. Sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and then vegetable oils, soybean oil, sunflower oil, canola oil. These are industrial seed oils processed at very high heat, and they do something very specific and damaging to your cardiovascular system. They throw off your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in a serious way. In a healthy body, that ratio should be roughly 4-1, and they average. American eating processed foods regularly is closer to 20-1. Some studies suggest even higher. Why does that ratio matter? Because omega-6 fatty acids in excess are pro-inflammatory. They signal your immune system to stay on permanent high alert. And a cardiovascular system that is constantly inflamed is a cardiovascular system that is aging significantly faster than it should be. I've seen patients with textbook healthy diets, whole grain, everything, very little red meat showing arterial inflammation markers of someone 20 years older. When we looked closely at what they were actually eating every day, it was these products. Whole grain bread, whole grain crackers, seed oil-based spreads every single day. The same goes for many breakfast cereals marketed as heart healthy, even the brand-based ones that seem